how it all went south.
All right, so I'm calling this the worst of the insurance scammers, which we end up talking about a lot of scammers during the show. And this is the story of a man named Ali Elmezayan and what he did to secure millions after murdering his autistic children in an insurance scam. And this is so bad that the story lives on the U.S. Department of Justice's website for its outrageousness. And in 2021, the Coalition Against Fraud Insurance welcomed Ali to their Insurance Fraud Hall of Fame. So he is in rarefied air for what he's done. Pretty crazy that there is a Insurance Fraud Hall of Fame, but they're just trying to be advocates for consumers, right? But this one's bad.
Yeah, that's crazy. I didn't know. You said it was the Department of Justice?
It was Department of Justice and I think like a nonprofit group also had it on there. So both DOJ and this other group had this guy listed as one of the worst offenders ever.
Wow, that's crazy.
Yeah. So let's get into this. So in 2021, I'm just using his first name because you know how I am about pronouncing last names or anything in particular. Ali was sentenced to 212 years in a federal prison for insurance fraud. He drove his 2 disabled children and ex-wife off a pier at the Port of Los Angeles in an attempt to collect on accidental death policies he had taken out on the family. His 3-year-old son was autistic, and he had an 8-year-old son also autistic, and a very severe case in both of the boys, from what I understand. Both of the boys were in the back in car seats and could not escape as he drove the car off a pier at that port in Los Angeles. Now, luckily, his wife did escape, though she did not know how to swim. She was rescued by a nearby fisherman. As the car fell, submerged into the water, Ali escaped through his driver's side window and escaped to safety.
That's horrible. You think I didn't realize they were, obviously that young and in car seats, strapped in, and that's terrible.
It's terrible. So
yeah, that's heartbreaking.
Yeah, U.S. District Judge John F. Walters said in court, quote, "He murdered his 2 autistic children, letting 2 innocent young boys die an extraordinarily painful death while strapped in their car seats. It's undisputed that death by drowning is a painful way to die. I can only imagine the horror they must have experienced as they struggled to get out of their seats as their lungs filled up with water." The judge also called his scheme evil and diabolical. And he's absolutely right about that.
Yeah, I don't even have anything, you know how I am with anything that happens to kids. I just have a weak spot, as I think most people do. But that's terrible.
So that's the event, right? So what was the lead up to this? So between 2012 and 2013, Ali took out $3 million in life and accidental death insurance. He spread it out, going across 8 different companies. At the same time, he had finished up a Chapter 11 bankruptcy case, and his income per year, his annual income that he was making, was only $30,000 a year, and he was spending $6,000 a year on the premiums to maintain this insurance.
So he was planning that for a bit. Sounds like, yeah. So during his trial, prosecutors played phone recordings where he was heard in conversation with the insurance companies. He wanted to confirm the policies were active and that they would be paid out with an accidental death, and that these policies would not investigate claims after 2 years when the policies were purchased. So he's on the phone just making sure that this happens. So, yeah. There has to be somebody at a company, I don't want to say fraud prevention is not the right word, but there has to be somebody who flags that kind of stuff. You would think, right?
You would think. And, he's trying to be clever by spreading it out across 8 different insurance companies and trying to check in and being a concerned policyholder and all that. So whatever. So it's interesting.
If my wife and kids go off a pier for, I don't know, just maybe a pier, Is that covered?
What happens if there's an accidental death? Who calls an insurance company?
That's what I mean. Yeah. Just in case.
Yeah. So I talked about that 2-year window, right? Making sure it's running.
Yeah.
And so I think it's like 12 days, 2 weeks, something like that. That's when this happens. So literally after those 2 years have happened, he drives the family off the pier like 12 days later. Yeah.
Again, this could be in one of the dumb criminals. I mean, it's obviously much worse than that, but it could be in the dumb criminals episodes because, I mean,
yeah,
you're making those calls. You're on record. Those calls are recorded. Maybe someone's flagging it. Maybe they're not. But then you 12 days after or whatever.
Yeah. It is really despicable. And so here's what happens. So after the death of his children, remember, his wife survives. I'm not really sure how she fits in. I don't think she's part of it, but like something weird happens. He collects $262,000 and he buys a boat and he buys property in Egypt. So he's taking that money and buying a boat, doing all these things. So initially, local authorities had looked at this as an accident, and Ali told them that he had no insurance policies on his children at all. Like, that wasn't even a thing. But then he and his wife, which is strange, filed a wrongful death lawsuit against the city of LA for the deaths of their children, for them driving off this pier. And it was then that authorities discovered the insurance policies. And by the way, that lawsuit was obviously thrown out. But to be so audacious that you want to file a wrongful death lawsuit when you were the one that drove your kids, autistic kids,
well, sure, he wants more
pier.
Money. But I'm surprised that the wife and him were in that part of that lawsuit together.
I know.
That for a minute there, I was going to say this was going a different way, and somehow she was involved in the.
It's interesting. I don't have a whole lot of details. There's not a lot of details on what the relationship was with the wife, and was there a conspiracy here, or did she not know, or was she still going along with the money because they need? I actually don't know. It was not deeply reported on.
Well, I can tell you this: guy was making $35,000 a year in LA. They needed the money,
right? But I mean, this is your
for
method.
Sure. I don't mean that way. I'm just saying,
Yeah. So in a Washington Post editorial, they state that local prosecutors still declined to bring charges, citing insufficient evidence. The car had been impounded for months, and it was difficult for them to determine whether the brakes were working at the time of him driving off the pier. But it was Ali's consistent and continued pursuit of trying to cash in on these policies that ultimately cracked this. Remember, along with the 2-year and 12-day window between the initial policy and the death of the boys, that was something that they flagged. So they found him, they cornered him, and he was convicted of mail fraud, wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and money laundering in 2019. And when he was sentenced, he was ordered to pay the nearly $262,000 back in restitution to the insurance companies. And so this is also interesting how these things develop. So it appears that murder charges were supposed to be held until after this federal case. So they're going after things like, wire fraud, mail fraud, all the insurance-y stuff, right? Yeah. And he was sentenced to 212 years in prison for the federal, all the insurance stuff. And I haven't seen anything yet that he's being charged with murder. And I don't know if it's because they got him to be in prison for for life and they don't need to prosecute it again. But it is strange to see something where he does this and he's not charged with murder.
Unless they just didn't feel that they would have had a solid case. It's like one of those cases where, like, I know you did it,
right?
But proving it in court is a little more difficult. And they said, look, with all these other charges, we can put him in in prison for the rest of his life. Let's just do that. But there's something to be said for it being out there and known that you did that. You killed your kids and tried to kill your wife. and that you've been on trial for that and we're found guilty for that. There's something.
It's kind of like your Scarlet A that says you really did murder your kids and you need to pay for that. And I think most in the community would support such a thing. But then again, there's the cost and there's the ability to prosecute. Remember, they had kept his car and it was impounded. It was, it was sitting there, and maybe they didn't have that strong of a case. And that's why they went after some of these other fraud charges first.
Yeah, that's I'm glad he's in prison, but that's a tough one. I keep picturing, the kids in their car seats, and what amount of money would ever drive, people to do shit like that. I
hate to say it, but like, couldn't you? I shouldn't even say it, but it's like, shouldn't you just kill your wife? Like, I know that just sounds terrible. But that's what a lot of spouses do, right?
Problems at home, Jason?
But you and I'm saying, actually have I actually have an answer to this. This is actually really, I did not think of this as I was researching it, and it is actually the last part, or the last chunk of what I wanted to talk about. In another Washington Post editorial entitled "Deaths Underscore Need to Rein in Child Life Insurance" in November of 2018, they talk about this case. And they say, quote, "It is chilling that he nearly succeeded in this alleged scheme. And perhaps most chilling, other children are at risk because of the loose standards and lax practices that make it so easy to insure a young life." They basically argue that, quote, there is rarely, if ever, a legitimate reason to insure a child's life for a large sum.
Yeah, I'm with that. There's not really, because you remember we did the Santa Barbara murders, where Fred Rayler had taken his family out on the boat and drowned, his stepson and his wife. But shortly before that, he had, however long before that, he had put massive life insurance policies, and that was in the 81.
Yeah.
So, it's been happening, and there's probably quite a few other cases like that.
Think about that. It's so, like, we think of life insurance as something that's more, hey, I'm starting to hit my 30s.
Yeah.
I need security in case, one of the, you or your spouse dies an early death, and we need to be able to take care of the kids, and you're
cover
doing
the funeral and all that.
Yeah. It's just, and it's harder to get insurance the older you get, and all those things because of illnesses and cancers and all those things are, you die in a car accident, whatever. But think of putting out a large insurance policy. Here it was, again, $3 million across 8 companies for your 3-year-old and 8-year-old autistic kids. It is so easy to do and so not necessary. And so I think it's important that the Washington Post pointed that out. And since then, there's been a lot of lockdowns in a number of states that make it more difficult to get insurance for kids at certain levels. It makes sense, but gosh, I would have never thought about that. Like, I just don't even think of taking out life insurance on kids.
Yeah. And certainly not for those reasons. And that's why I like you, Jason.
Yeah. So let me ask you, do you feel like this raises to the level of the Insurance Fraud Hall of Fame? Because I sure do.
Oh, yeah. I think I got a lot of things to say. Trying not to get us kicked off YouTube.
Right.
But yeah, I think it should be on a lot of halls of fame. Sick, twisted halls of fame.
The autistic kids who are having, they were severely autistic, barely able probably to function in society, and, having a real tough time growing up. To be able to do that to those children, I think even more makes it that much more despicable, you know?
Yep.
So that's what I got this week. It ends on a sour note, unfortunately, but we do need to call these people out for the bad deeds that they do. I'm Jason Hoke. That's Sean Kipe. That has been our episode of How It All Went South, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.